Hello, everyone. Welcome to what has become an unfortunately quite infrequent Tuesday night patrons only stream. How is everyone doing here this fine evening? I am glad to be joining you and chatting with all of you about some Hellfinder. That's what we're going to be talking about here today. You'll have to excuse me, I'm a little distracted by the fact that I've screwed up something on my I'm just going to close it. I'll just deal with it later. I'm going to have a little bit of hard time responding to chat because I screwed up something in my profile here as I got started. But I'm going to have chat over on the side, so I still should be able to see it. Hi there, everybody. Welcome. Yeah, it's been a bit between some work conflicts and, frankly, life getting in the way and some random bouts of just kind of insomnia and stuff. I haven't been able to stream a lot on Tuesdays lately. Work has been the primary culprit. For those of you in the know, you know I'm in the middle of the design cycle along with my partner in crime, Joe Pacini, on creating Pathfinder Quest. And that is just eating up all of my spare time, especially on weekdays when we're trying to get some things done in the middle of the week. Tuesday nights has just been the sacrificial night. I like in the past month, like Mondays, Tuesdays, and Wednesdays, I've had to work until like 8 or 9 or 10, or, you know, had to like break, grab a quick bite, and then get back to work. Yesterday, I put in a 12-hour day, so I've been pretty busy lately. That said, even though that's happening, I have been making progress on some fronts. Not much, but some. The biggest news here is that Hellfinder continues to march forward rather nicely. The big thing here is that Hellfinder, you know, we had this plan to kind of launch it. It would have been launched and actually done already by now. But the timing there just wasn't in the cards. I wasn't ready. I didn't have enough of the game done. And I didn't want to try and crowdfund with like a half-finished game. So we postponed the crowdfunder until spring, or perhaps late winter. We'll see how the timing on it works out. I may bump it just a little to smooth some things out. But the design has continued, right? That was the entire point of moving it, was to give myself a bit more time to do some of the design work, right? Just to get it done. And the big thing was working to get the playtest ready. Now, when I say playtest, I don't mean the playtest of the entire... I don't mean the playtest of the entire adventure. I mean a playtest of a component of it. To get a sense of the system, to see if some aspects of it are working the right way. Now, a few weeks back... God, it's been like 3 now at this point, maybe even 4. We had a Tuesday where I kind of walked everybody through some of the... character generation. And basically it starts by saying, yes, you are a human, pick your human stuff. Then it says pick a background. This kind of defines how you grew up and what you were doing as a kid. From there, it moves on into, you know, when you got into the agency, what was your primary training specialization, right? You know, were you in forensics? Were you a special agent? Were you being trained for SWAT? You know, what were you being trained to do before you got sent to the basement, right? Because that's the conceit of Hellfinder, is that you work for this government agency, but you work in the basement. You're the lowest of the low. You're the employee. You're the employees who are just this far away from being fired, or worse, like being, you know, brought up on charges. And instead, they have reassigned you to a section of the agency called the Department of Clean, the Co-Departmental Land, Equipment, and Assets Network. And basically, you're sent down to an office where your job is to clean up messes, to work on, you know, old records, old files, mostly financial stuff, to make sure the Bureau is not wasting money. So it's a basement dweller kind of job. But it is one that does occasionally get field work. Not exciting field work. Not glamorous field work. It's usually, you know, drive out to this old field office, pack it down, close it out, return the keys, close out the contracts, and get the FBI out of that business. Or it might be something like, hey, we had a clandestine agent who had an apartment and all this stuff, but they've had to move on with whatever job they're doing, or they've been reassigned. They don't have to go pack up their apartment. People from this network have to go pack up their apartment and clear it out and clean it out. So that's the sort of thing that they get to do. The conceit, that with that being said, the central storyline involves the group being sent to close down a field agent in field office in northern Wisconsin. I'm not going to talk anymore about that because that's the main story. That is what is going to be featured as kind of the central through-line tale in Hellfinder. And obviously I don't want to spoil that, right? You know, I don't want to give away kind of what that's all about. I may give some clues here at some point in time, and I've certainly given some through the backer kit page, but I've been a little circumspect on it, and for a reason, right? I don't want to spoil that just yet, and frankly, some of it's still coming together. So, you know, that's kind of how that works. But what I can talk about is what I've designed as the preview adventure. The entire point of this adventure is to be something I can actually showcase that doesn't spoil the main story. So it's like a micro adventure. It's designed to be one long session or two short sessions, and and it takes place on the road. So the story opens with it getting kind of late. The sun is setting, and a group of 4 agents are driving from Washington, D.C. to northern Wisconsin, which is, you know, in a car, that's a 2-day trip at a minimum. Possibly 3, but definitely 2. And it's gotten late, and they're looking for a place to stay the night. So that's the kind of setup on that, and it's designed to be an adventure that I can show, that I can actually use as part of the ramp to the launch of the campaign. I'm trying to design this in such a way so that I can actually run it multiple times and showcase the game to multiple folks, not only on streams, but with like maybe some actual play folks. So that's what we're going to talk about tonight. We're going to talk a little bit about the first play session. We're also going to talk about the setup of this adventure, which is pretty unique and exciting. I'm very excited about it because I think it speaks very well to my jamming style and kind of the style of what I think Hellfinder adventures are going to be. So probably best to start with that. Not Hellfinder. Too many H-finders. What am I doing? So Pathfinder as a game, right? So Hellfinder's a hack of Pathfinder. That means at its heart, it uses some of the same resolution mechanics and stuff like that. I think one of the big things that Hellfinder is doing is it's de-emphasizing combat. So Hopefinder has combat front and center. Fighting zombies is a thing you do all the time. It's a part of the story. The zombies are beatable, but you will get battered and slowly wear down and lose the fight if you fight too much. Hellfinder is different. Hellfinder is the kind of game where you don't want to get in a fight. It's a horror game, which means fights are bad. That means things have broken down and you're at your last resort. Well, Alara, I mean, I am doing my H trilogy, so you just caught on to what I'm actually doing. There will be one more. This is not the last H game I'm doing. But so in Hellfinder, it's a horror game, as I said, and so you fighting shouldn't be a thing that there's a monster, quick, fight it. No, there's a monster. We need to get out of here because we are very fragile. And what I mean by that is characters get wounded very easily, right? It's not just hit point damage. It's trauma, right? And to that end, the game also introduces a concept called stress. And the more stressed you are, the closer you can get to like a full-blown like panic attack or kind of a catatonic episode, or just freaking out, right? But as you take stress, you can also gain mental trauma. And traumas are harder to get rid of, right? So the entire point of the game is that you have to be careful, right? You shouldn't be looking for combat. Combat is a good way to end up with a lot of trauma really fast. And that's going to stick with you and make it easier the next time you end up in a fight for you to die, right? To outright just lose it. So, that brings me around to this dichotomy. So, Pathfinder adventures are written... here's a map, here's all the encounters, here's what you fight, here's the treasure you get, here's the plot line that's baked into that you learn through NPCs and stuff. And you go from A to B to C to D to E to F, and there might be some choice in there. You can go from A to B, C, D, or E, but then C and D also lead to E, and E leads to F, and B leads to F, but only if you do G first, right? You can kind of do complex web narratives and stuff, but at its heart, Pathfinder adventures are written as kind of a full narrative experience that kind of keeps the players within certain bounded scope, right? If you go into the dungeon, I mean, it's a dungeon, right? There's a bunch of rooms, they follow in order, you might be able to choose different ones, but in the end, you still have to encounter them in the way that they are presented. And most of the time, there aren't a lot of options on how to negotiate most of the encounters. A lot of them are fights. And, when you encounter the, hungry basilisk, diplomacy isn't really on the table. Now, you might be able to trick it or do nature or something like that to kind of get it to go away or something, but... Excuse me. I'm having a run of dry throat here. This always happens when I start my streams. So, the adventure structure itself is pretty rigid, is what I'm getting at. It provides a lot of details that you have to learn all of to present it the right way, and in the end, the ways that it can be solved are pretty much dictated by the scope of the adventure itself. When it comes to Hellfinder, I'm trying to do something a little different. And it's not revolutionary. Other games try to do this as well, where I set the scene, I provide the characters, their personas, kind of what they're all about. I give how they interact with each other. I kind of give a timeline of events. But how the story unfolds depends on player action. Depends on what they do or what they don't do, right? Let me give you a simple example. The players arrive at the scene of a building, and there's clearly a fire somewhere inside. Now, how do they approach this? Any way they want. They could barge in the front door, in the front of this warehouse that isn't really full of smoke yet, and realize that the fire's in a back office where someone's trying to burn all the records. They could then immediately go to try and set off the fire suppression system, only to learn that it's been disabled. There's all these things that they can do, and they could try and re-enable it and get the water to go, or they could find fire extinguishers, or they could call the fire department. They could be doing combinations of these things. They can approach it however they want. The adventure doesn't dictate it. It just sets the stage for what's happening and lets the players interact with it. That's kind of how most Hellfinder stories are going to be structured. There are problems to be solved, mysteries are presented, things that aren't clear, investigations that need to happen, and how the players get to the bottom of them is really up to them. It's how they decide to approach the situation. And if they don't do the right things, they miss the right clues, they might not get to the right result. That's how it works, right? So it's a little bit more free form. The narrative structure is all still there, right? In that it does say, hey, here are these people, here's these scenes, here's these locations, here's the people who live here, here's when they're there, here's when they're not there, right? In that same, setup, You know, if they get there before the fire is about, maybe the fire is being set off by an incendiary device on a timer, they could arrive early and find the janitorial staff still there or something, right? They could arrive late and find the building engulfed in flames, right? Because it happens on a timer. It's not something they get to control. How they respond to it, that's what they get to control. So, that's the kind of base setup. That's where we start. Now, for this story in particular, I'm trying to create a story that I can tell more than once. Because I think one thing that's really interesting is that with that sort of narrative framework, if you build it the right way, you can tell different stories in the same setup. And that's what I'm trying to do with this intro. So, we're about to dive into spoilers, so I'm going to tell you right now, I'm about to reveal kind of what the intro adventure is about and how it works. That way I can tell you about how my players are interacting with the first piece of it. So, this is your check mark. This is your last line of demarcation. You will not hurt my feelings if you bail out because you prefer to play this one day. I have a sneaking suspicion this introductory adventure will be an unlocked stretch goal. I'm going to use it to promote the game, but then I will include it as part of the package if we meet our funding goals and probably hit a stretch goal or two or something. I don't know. I'm still working it out. So, that's your warning. So, you've gotten it. Here we go. So, the way this story starts out is that the players, as I said, are on the road from Washington, D.C. to Wisconsin. And for those of you worried about the main story, this has nothing to do with the main story at all. It's just there to set the stage, to kind of set the mood and tone of the game, but it's not... It has nothing to do. It is not tied to the main story at all, so you won't be getting any spoilers of that. So, they're on the road, making their way from Washington, D.C. to northern Wisconsin, and they need to stop for the night, and they stop at a motel and diner in the middle of nowhere, Ohio. And this place is called The Last... What did I call it? It's got a great name. I'm really happy with the name, and now I can't remember it. I'll get there. Come here, you. I should probably pull this up anyway, just so that I got names and stuff right. There it is. Come here. It's called the Half Past. It's called the Half Past Motel and Diner. So they pull up to the Half Past Motel and Diner, and one key part of the story here is that it's pouring rain. It is mid-October at the point where this story begins, and it is just pouring rain outside. It is inhospitable, so much so that anybody who spends 10 minutes outside without like a proper umbrella or a raincoat or something just gets totally drenched and takes a point of stress, right? I love having stress as a it works just like hit points, by the way. You have a maximum amount of stress you can have before bad things happen, but if you take too much stress at one time, you can get trauma. But little things like this are great to charge stress for, because they're stressful. Like being out in the rain isn't going to necessarily kill you, at least not in the short term. But it does make you uncomfortable, makes you irritable, right? Being soaked to the bone is going to make you kind of unhappy, so taking a point of stress makes sense. So, they arrive at this motel, and they're able to get a room, right? They meet the hotel's owner and keeper, someone named, is it Maxine? Might as well pull up my names, that way I'm not using the wrong ones. Maxine First. Although they don't know that, she just has a name tag on that says manager. So they can get rooms, and they go into the diner because it's dinner time. Now, this is a very classic Americana, rundown, lousy kind of diner place. It's the place where you get vinyl coated menus that are in vinyl holders that are yellowed and stained around the edges that only have one page of food. It's mostly sandwiches, burgers, chicken, maybe a club sandwich. Has a special of the day that's always meatloaf. Always has a soup of the day, but it's always chili. Because they use the old hamburgers. That's where they go. It's the kind of place that only has one vegetarian option, and it's salad that is iceberg lettuce. It has a steakhouse dinner, which is like you're getting a steak out of the freezer, and an old baked potato, right? It's a rundown kind of lousy place, and they go into this place, and I'm layering in the details, and at this point in time, they start to get to meet the kind of cast of characters, right? Because they're not the only ones staying at the motel, and it's pretty late, so the odds that new people are going to be showing up are pretty small. In that it's like creeping up on 8 o'clock at night when they arrive, and it's raining heavily. So when they arrive, they get greeted by the server, Max or Debbie, again name tags, and and they see a tall, lanky cook in the background wearing like a faded Sex Pistols shirt or Jane's Addiction or something like that. A faded 40-something punker is at work in the kitchen, and there's a handful of guests, including like a trucker wearing a bright red hat that just says BR on it. No, it's not one of those bright red hats. There's an elderly couple sharing a meal together. There's a businessman down at the end of the diner counter opposite the trucker. And in a booth kind of at the far end in the back is some kind of big hulking dude wearing like a soaked through raincoat that's just sitting there quietly eating his food. Heavy brow, short trimmed black hair, small diamond tattoo on his neck. And that's kind of your setup. There's other people you might get to meet over time. The place has like a handyman and housekeeper named Henry or Enrique, depending on who you're talking to or who's talking to him. And one other guest does arrive a little later. A woman who's drenched, young woman who's drenched to her drenched to her bones, and looks like she just came in off the highway. And that's kind of the setup. So it actually, the BR stands for Big Red, because that's his name. He's got red hair, and he's a kind of obnoxious trucker who spends most of his time hitting on Debbie. So you got this cast of characters, and they all have scripted, here's who they are and what they're doing, right? The businessman is sitting there eating a kind of cold sandwich that he's picking at while going through paperwork and going through stuff on his laptop. And his name is, if you introduce yourself to him, his name is Daniel Tanaka, and he's from Chicago, and he's pretty low key guy, just hanging out, having dinner, on a drive back. He lives in Chicago, and he was at a conference in New Jersey, but he couldn't make it back, so he stopped here for the night. The elderly couple are driving an RV, but the RV's heat is broken, so they stayed at a hotel tonight. The trucker obviously has a big semi rig in the parking lot, and is kind of obnoxiously hitting on the waitress. The big guy in the back is in fact Russian, and is very ominous and says very little and has like a Russian prison tattoo on his neck. So you got this cast, right? Grand total. You've got the owner, you've got the housekeeper, handyman, you've got Debbie, the server and cashier at the diner, Anthony or T, Blackthorn is the scrawny cook in the back, the scrawny, really tall cook in the back. Angus Big Red McCreed is the trucker. The elderly couple are Helen and Walter Beach. And the woman who came in calls herself Violet Somerset. So all things total, you got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 NPCs. 10. And you get introduced to all of them while just sitting in the diner. At least briefly. You meet the manager when you check in. Henry, or Enrique, comes in for a coffee at one point. And chats familiarly with Debbie. Most of the other guests are there. Most of them are having dinner. Violet only comes in and gets food to go and takes it back to her room. But everybody else has their schedule and scripted. This is the time they spend at the diner. This is how they react to people. But it's not tight. It's not like at exactly 8:14 this happens. It's not that exacting. It's more like they finish their meal and go to bed at 8:30, right? Or go back to their room at 8:30. This guy stays till 9. This person comes in at this time and leaves at that time. It's mostly, think of it like think of it more like the schedule of NPCs for Stardew Valley, right? They have certain times where they're in certain locations. But none of it's set in stone. You can change it. You can do whatever you want with it. Now, why am I telling you all this? This is just setup. Why? Who cares? It's a diner, right? Well, that's where the story gets interesting, because someone's going to die. At least one person. Maybe more, depending on how things go. And the thing that's really interesting about this diner has a jukebox. And it's playing mostly old tunes, and my playtest group, one of them went up and investigated it right away because it's an old jukebox. But all the songs are faded like it's a record player jukebox, and it's got those little metal holders with like the names of the songs and stuff, and it's got the rack of those, and then you basically pick your song by picking a number and a letter to kind of pick the album and the track, and it's got 7 numbers and 7 letters for a total of 50 tracks, and you know, that's what it has. But it's old, and the coin thing doesn't even work, so they just let people pick music for free just so it's not quiet in there. And the way that the adventure really kicks off, so the players arrive and they get a chance to kind of place their orders, and you know, I'll get to how my group responded, but there's some fun stuff in there. You know, they get to place their orders and stuff, and then suddenly the last track that somebody picked ended, and just this kind of clicking, popping static, like the speaker system is really old and terrible, comes on over the system and just starts irritating everybody. It's just irritating, kind of static and audio pops and clicks, and it's just really irritating, and everybody takes a point of stress as they sit there trying to listen to it. And Debbie, who's going by to give somebody else their food, asks one of them to just go pick a track, any track, just put something on. Little do the players know that they are actually deciding how the adventure is going to play out by choosing what track, because they don't know what the tracks are. They're not set, because all of them are faded and you can't really read them. So they're just picking a letter and a number, any one they want, and that determines who gets killed and who does the killing. And it's not that the jukebox is magical. It's not magic, it's nothing like that. It's just a way for me to randomize the events and make it different every time. So the number picked determines the killer, the letter picked determines the victim, and there's only 7 on each. So some people can never be the murderer, and some people can never be the victim. But there are a few people who are on both. That's how it begins, and that's kind of where the story unfolds. So the entire point here is that it sets the stage, gives you a kit of pieces, and for each killer, it describes kind of what their motive is, what their style is, based on their character. And then the victims, it determines where they are found. And you know, each victim kind of includes kind of what they might do to attract the killer's ire, right? Or kind of, it helps mend together the story, right? So the victim gets picked based on something they're doing, or some facet of their personality that then causes the killer to go after them. And in some cases, it depends on the combination. So it's kind of this complex matrix in the adventure that talks about, okay, who was picked as the killer, who was picked as the victim. Here are notes about how all those things might go together, because there's 50 combinations, right? And a lot of them are similar, right? But some of them are very much not. So my group, which comprises, some friends of mine, I'm sure you know some of them. By the way, no spoilers. Don't tell them anything. I'm not really going to tell you much more than they know, but still. So they arrive at the diner and immediately fall in love with the detail of the place. Right? This is using Pathfinder rules, so there's not a lot of make extra rolls for stuff, but they start kind of investigating the place, and they're FBI agents, but they mostly are just treating it as a dinner, right? Nobody's immediately going into adventurer mode, which is good because they're not supposed to. But they do start getting familiar with the characters, and they get irritated with Big Red kind of being extra friendly to Debbie, but it's clear that Debbie has dealt with him before many times and knows how to handle him, and they kind of let that go. But then they give Big Red kind of a warning, and the evening starts progressing. But before I could even do the static thing, one of them goes and is like, I'm gonna go press some numbers on the jukebox, totally unprompted, and I'm just like, all right, well, that was easier than I thought. So they press some numbers on the jukebox. And I tell them that, some late 70s punk music starts playing, and they're like, whoa, I didn't expect that in here. And it's like, yeah. And they go and sit down, and they go about ordering their meal, and it's an odd cast of characters. They're one of them's super excited to be having diner food. Another one is trying to be a vegetarian. And another character orders the steak, but orders it well done. So they're a mess of folks, and we're having fun. We had about a 2.5 hour session, all things considered. Yeah, well, the steaks were coming out well done one way or the other, is the joke. And the salad that was ordered without bacon clearly ended up having bacon thrown on it that they then picked out. And it's just kind of ridiculous, right? They all had a slice of pie at the end, and they really leaned into role playing with folks and kind of trying to get a bead on the people in the place, right? They kind of ignored the elderly couple for the most part, although at the end, the elderly couple noticed that they ordered the last of the pie and told them that it was delicious and their favorite here. And, the businessman, they didn't really talk to him much. He was pretty self-obsessed. And Big Red, they kind of messed around with. And the large kind of Russian, they tried to make overtures too, but clearly got blocked. He just did not want to interact with them at all. So motley kind of cast of folks. And it's clear that there was some anger and frustration at the kitchen because the players came in at pretty late in the day and ordered baked potatoes, which, he didn't have ready. And, just kind of, got the vibe of the place. Now, when one of them picked the numbers, they immediately started changing the way the story was unfolding, because now I know who the killer was, and I had to, on the fly, start inventing, kind of putting together all the pieces to make the motive work and bring it all together. Now, the killer they happen to pick, their MO, their whole deal is that they are surprise, surprise, it's called Hellfinder. So you're going to get a lot of different types of killers and bad people in this. But they happened to pick pretty stereotypical on their first go through, and got the guy who's a Satanist, who is offering up sacrifices to Satan and trying to perform actual occult rituals. So once they picked that, I knew I needed to start layering in those components of the story. So those components aren't there if they pick the guy who's a serial killer. They don't those components aren't there if the elderly couple get picked as the killers, because they're doing it for they do it as a team for fun. But those people are not the killers in other ones, right? So it's like there's only one killer, and they got the cook. So the cook, I'm trying to say it quietly, just I don't know who can hear me. The cook is the killer, and to that end, they quickly come to realize one of them goes and has to use the bathroom, and this place, it's kind of place that only has one bathroom, and the door doesn't even close very well, and the room in there is filthy and gross. And they go into the bathroom, and scratched into kind of the cheap plastic liner on the wall is a pentagram. And I had them roll occult because they happen to be good at occult. And they recognized it as being like, not just like, oh, I used my eraser and made a pentagram on my notebook because I'm evil, right? No, they recognized it as being like, oh, whoever's doing this knows what they're up to, right? And I'm not saying that occult rituals are real, but there's a difference between I know what the old, symbols and alchemical rites are that are supposed to summon Satan and his lieutenants, the religious iconography kind of pulled together with pagan symbolism. There's a difference between I know what that's supposed to look like and I drew some bullshit on the wall, that is clearly nonsense. And they made the check and realized that it was, in fact, looked pretty legit. Took a couple photos, because this is modern era, so they have cell phones and stuff. Although they're currently at a place with like literally one bar of service, and no Wi-Fi. But they do still have their technology. They just can't communicate very well with the outside world. But they take photos of this and then just go sit back down at the table and don't even mention it to the rest of the party. That's good stuff. So all of this starts coming together. They don't know. They don't know anything's going wrong yet, right? So they kind of close up their meal. They get some beer in buckets to go. Bottles of beer in a bucket. And they take those up to their room, and they're not ready to sleep yet, so they hang out and they're talking and trying to get the TV to work, and they're getting to use some of their skills, right? So far up to this point in time, we've had, diplomacy check, an intimidate check, handful of perception checks, an occultism check. It's been a handful of checks. The players have taken a little bit of stress now and again, but not too much, usually just 1 point, right? The vegetarian took a point of stress when he got his meal, and clearly it had meat on it. Everybody took a point of stress from the popping crash, because the static did eventually show up, and gave everybody a point of stress. It just happened later, because I want to get to testing those mechanics, and I need them to start taking damage before they do. But nobody's taken a lot yet. No traumas being given out or anything like that. So one by one, the other guests kind of roll off to the room. Debbie calls, hey, last call for orders, and they put in orders for, milkshakes and stuff to go, and they're just pissing off the cook at this point in time, and they're not even knowing it, and I'm just staring at my notes going, yeah, right? And unbeknownst to them, the businessman, because he's picked as the victim, is dissatisfied with his food, and doesn't eat most of it, and takes his knife and fork and threads them together. Now, for those in the hospitality industry, that's the unspoken symbol of this food was not good, right? If you ever look down on a plate, and people can do it unintentionally, but it is an intentional symbol that if you see the knife stuck between the tines of the fork making an X on the plate, that is the kind of the etiquette symbol of this food was not to my liking. And he leaves it that way. And then also on the bill, which is, the standard, this place doesn't have a computerized menu system. It's got a register at the end, and all the tickets are handwritten. And on the ticket, he leaves a tip, but specifically not for the cook. So he pisses off the cook as well. And that's going to end up on the little spear, right? You know how the places that have paper bills, they put them on a spear at the end. So to be clear, none of this is in the adventure. So what I'm trying to lay down here is that the adventure gives you the kit of parts, and then you as GM get to improvise and kind of pull together the disparate pieces as the adventure is unfolding. So I knew who my victim was, I knew who the killer was, and I was building a motive as they were talking and experiencing the adventure. And I was doing that while also having other characters interact with the story and interact with other characters as well. So it didn't just become the cook and the businessman story. The weird Russian gave everyone strange looks and kind of made some bristled movements towards one of them as they talked to him. The trucker was certainly being obnoxious the whole time. The elderly couple made sure to come and talk to them. The woman who came in off the streets, who is drenched, looks like she might be escaping a bad situation or relationship. Maybe her parents, maybe a boyfriend or something. She's not in a good way and is left already. The owner of this place is kind of sketch and creepy. So my point is, they don't know what's happening because as of yet, nothing's happened. So they've gotten these buckets of beer. They go back to their room. They're talking. They're bullshitting. They've managed to make the TV work a little bit and are watching like old episodes of Three's Company or some nonsense. And out on the porch, right? Or not porch, the walkway. This is a motel, right? They're on the second floor of a 2-story motel. And down the way, they hear a scream. They hear something break. And then it all goes quiet again. It's still raining heavily outside. So they go outside. And they see down the way that there's a broken bottle on the walkway. Along with maybe some like bags of chips or something that were dropped. And they hear a door slam down there. But that isn't what draws their attention, because they look out into the parking lot and they see the businessman, his clothes cut open, his body splayed from neck to groin, all the skin pulled back, the bones opened, all of his internal organs are gone. And in the middle of his chest, in the middle of the pouring rain, is a black candle burning brightly. His blood is washed down over this car, creating an ever-growing pool of blood that is washing out in the rain. And that's where we ended the game. The scream was a scream of someone else. Not witnessing this, but seeing the results. And they may have seen something else. It's not the murderer, it's someone who saw the murder as well as they did. So, that's where we ended. So, the entire first session, the entire first half, is purely just setup. Getting you to know these people, getting to know this kind of rundown, creepy motel, and the strange cast of characters who inhabit it. And then at the very end, it sucker punches you with just a visceral nightmare. And there's a lot of different things that can happen based on who you pick and, who gets picked. But basically, what you pick on the jukebox radically alters the story. from beginning to end. And there's a lot of different ways it can go and different ways it can unfold. But they are now stuck in the middle of this. It's literally a half past midnight, which is the nubbin of the story. The first murder gets found at half past, and the hotel is called the Half Past. So at half past midnight, that's when you find the first murder, and you basically have until dawn to figure it out, and track them down. And depending on what murderer you pick, they may try and kill again, or they may just try and hide you out, or like hide out and avoid you. There is a chance that depending on who you picked, if you push them too far, they may try and come after you, which is a very real possibility with the murderer that they have picked. Yeah, the way it works is the entire venture is set up, and then at the bottom it's just like, yep, here's a list of all the possible killers, and here's a list of all the possible victims. And they picked the cook and the businessman. But in this case, the cook will kill again if pressured. But otherwise, we'll just try and stay in hiding. So we'll see how it goes. There is a breadcrumb trail that leads directly to him, but it requires them to look for the right things. If they go into the diner, they can go through the check stubs and realize that Daniel insulted the cook. If they go into the kitchen, they can find the plate of food that still has the knife and fork in it. But that may not tell them who did it, because a fair number of people had like the club sandwich that night. So they may not know exactly whose plate it was at first. They're going to have to try and figure all those things out, right? And they can wake people up. They can question people. The one thing they can't do is call the cops, because the moment this whole thing starts, the first thing the killer does is cut the phone lines. So there's no way to communicate with the outside world. You can leave, but that's it. So that's kind of how the story begins. I'm pretty excited to see how it ends. The next session is where we're going to be fully testing this trauma and stress system, because, well, frankly, what they just saw is going to require a will save, and those who fail it are going to take a hefty dose of stress. And those who take a hefty dose of stress may actually end up with a trauma from just this first scene. Now, it might be something they can get rid of, right? You know, that's how traumas work. You can get rid of them. They're not permanent, but you have to work on them, and you have to work to improve them. Some just go away over time. Some you have to get therapy for. Psychology is a skill in this game. So, yeah, that's it. And I'm hoping to run this multiple times, because each time they can pick a different killer. They can pick a different victim, and that'll lead to an entirely different story. So, folks, we're at about 10:02. I got another stream coming up here in about 10 minutes. I want to make sure I get to that. And what was the reaction? Their reaction was, "What the?" And then it just cut. They were very shocked, because there really wasn't any. The story is not meant to have. It's meant to have a very slow burn and then a sudden rocket of, oh, things are not okay here, right? And I love to end things on a cliffhanger like that, so it works out great for me. All right, folks. That's all I have here tonight, folks. I'm going to thank you all for hanging out. Thanks for being my patrons. I know I haven't charged for the past 2 months. If all goes according to plan, the patrons should start changing soon. I'm not going to charge anyone until I change up the patron. Those of you who have given all your support up to this point and are owed some benefits, those are still going to be credited to you. No worries there. But I am in the process of starting to change things up. I got to kind of figure out a couple things and figure out how I'm going to transition some things. But I really want to transform this channel into kind of all about all the stuff that I do and all the different things that rewards I can give and offers I can give and stuff like that, that I think might help to reinvigorate this little Patreon here on the internet. But you are all the backbones of it, and I greatly appreciate you being here. Thank you for watching, everybody. I'm sure I'll see most of you here in just a few moments. So take care of yourself, and we will see you next time.